At
The
exactly
shadows are
midnight, the
gathering.
power
You
in
must come with
Boston
me.
died.
Who are you?
Not
A
flickered,
guardian.
not
The
dimmed,
shadows are gathering. You
gone.
must come with me.
Lyra felt
Who
it
are
happen
you?
from 3
A guardian.
rooftops away.
Trust me.
The hum of electricity that had blanketed this human city vanished in a single breath, replaced by silence so complete it made her ears ring. She stumbled against a brick chimney, silver blood streaming from the wound in her shoulder, her dampening device sparking uselessly in her trembling hand. They had found her. The collectors always found their targets eventually. That was why the Galactic Syndicate paid them so well. But Lyra had hoped for more time. Enough time to finish her research. Enough time to prove what she had discovered about this strange, chaotic species called humanity. Now she had minutes at best. The night air tasted like rain and exhaust fumes. Below her, the city stretched out in sudden darkness, a maze of streets and buildings that should have terrified her. Instead, Lyra felt something unexpected. Hope. Because in her 3 months observing this world from orbit and shadow, she had learned something the Syndicate's predictive models could never account for. Humans did not behave the way the galaxy expected. Lyra pressed her hand against the wound, feeling the strange warmth of her own blood cooling in Earth's atmosphere. Her species did not bleed red like humans did. Their blood carried light bioluminescent silver that marked them as evolved beyond primitive hemoglobin. Right now, that silver glow was a beacon for anyone hunting her. She had to move. Lyra's scanner showed a single viable target 4 buildings west. An apartment, top floor, occupant male age 58, living alone. But it was not those details that drew her attention. It was the cognitive signature. Unpredictable. A mind that cycled through memories, regrets, and fractured thoughts in patterns no artificial intelligence could map. In her months of research, Lyra had learned that human minds were naturally disordered compared to other species. But this one was exceptional. This was a mind she could hide behind. Lyra ran. Her body moved too smoothly for Earth gravity, each leap carrying her farther than it should. She had adjusted her personal field to match human norms, but fear was overriding her control. Behind her, she felt rather than heard the pressure change. The collectors were deploying. They did not announce themselves. They did not need to. Lyra reached the fire escape of the target building and descended in near silence. Her species had evolved past the need for clumsy bipedal locomotion, but she forced herself into human patterns. Feet on metal grating, hands gripping rust-flaked rails. The window ahead showed darkness inside. She had no more time to be careful. Lyra touched the window lock and sent a pulse through it. The mechanism clicked open. She slid inside and closed it behind her just as the first hunter materialized on the rooftop she had fled from. Even from this distance, she could see its form, tall and wrong, wrapped in armor that bent light away from itself, hunting her. The apartment interior smelled like old coffee and loneliness. Lyra's eyes adjusted instantly to the darkness. She stood in a bedroom. Simple furniture, a bed with military-tight corners, photographs on the dresser showing a younger version of the occupant in uniform standing beside a woman with kind eyes. The woman was absent from more recent photos. Widow Lyra's mind cataloged automatically. Grief signature, consistent with human loss patterns. Perfect. She moved toward the bedroom door, intending to find a hiding spot deeper in the apartment. But the door opened before she reached it. A man stood in the doorway. He was exactly as her scanner had indicated. 58 years old, gray, starting to silver at his temples. Lean build that spoke of old discipline, maintained through habit rather than vanity. But what her scanner had not captured was the sharpness in his eyes. Even in the darkness, even startled from sleep, those eyes assessed her in a single glance. Military training, Lyra realized. He has seen threats before. They stared at each other for a heartbeat that stretched too long. Then Lyra made her choice. She dropped to her knees, dampener falling from her hand, and pressed her uninjured palm to the floor. In the gesture of supplication her research said humans understood. Her voice came out raw, stripped of all the careful clinical distance she had maintained in her studies. Please help me, human. The man did not move, did not speak. His hand had gone to his waistband where Lyra's scanner showed he kept a weapon, but he had not drawn it. He was analyzing, deciding. Lyra felt the pressure building outside. The hunters were sweeping the area, scanner drones spreading out in predictive patterns. Seconds now. Please, she whispered again. The man's jaw tightened. Then he moved with speed that surprised her, crossing the room and gripping her good arm. Inside, he said, his voice rough from sleep and caution. Now. He pulled her toward the closet, shoving aside hanging clothes with one hand while supporting her with the other. At the back of the closet was a panel Lyra's scanner had not detected. The man pressed a specific point, and the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow crawl space that led into the building's old maintenance infrastructure. "Get in," he ordered. Lyra obeyed without hesitation. The space was tight, dusty dark. She pulled herself forward, feeling the man climb in behind her. He replaced the panel just as the apartment's front door exploded inward. The sound was like metal screaming underwater. Through cracks in the crawlspace floor, Lyra watched three figures enter the apartment. They moved with mechanical precision, each step calculated to cover maximum area with minimum wasted motion. Their armor reflected nothing, absorbed everything. Light seemed to die around them. Collectors. Lyra had seen them before in her research, always from a distance, always observing their methods. They were not soldiers. They were not warriors. They were retrieval specialists. Living beings classified as property to be reclaimed. Emotions did not factor into their work. One of them raised a device that pulsed with sickly green light, a life scanner, military grade, capable of detecting biological signatures through walls, through shielding, through most forms of concealment. It swept across the bedroom. Lyra went absolutely still. Beside her in the crawl space, the human man was breathing slowly, controlled. She could feel his presence warm and alive, his mind churning with thoughts she could sense but not read. The scanner beeped, slow, curious. The collector holding it tilted its helmeted head, adjusting settings. The green light intensified, sweeping again across the bedroom, across the closet, across the floor beneath which they hid. Lyra felt her dampener failing completely. The device in her hand went cold and dead. Without it, her biosignature would blaze like fire to their sensors. The scanner beeped again. Faster now. The collector stepped toward the closet. Then something unexpected happened. The human beside Lyra shifted slightly, not moving away, moving closer. In his mind, that scattered storm of human consciousness suddenly intensified. Lyra felt it wash over her like a wave. He was thinking about war, about sand and heat, and the sound of gunfire echoing between buildings in a city called Fallujah, about brothers in arms who did not come home, about promises made to a woman with kind eyes who got sick anyway, who died anyway, who left him anyway. His thoughts were not focused. They scattered and reformed, cycling through pain and memory and guilt and stubborn determination to keep going despite it all. It was beautiful disorder, and it was masking her. The scanner swept past them again. This time it hesitated, confused. The human biosignature it detected was too loud, too complex, generating too many variables for its predictive algorithms to process cleanly. It could not separate his presence from hers. Lyra held her breath. The collector stood motionless for 10 seconds. 20. Then it turned away, speaking in a language Lyra's translator rendered as area unclear. Subject may have exited through alternate route. The three collectors began systematically destroying the apartment. Drawers opened and emptied. Furniture moved aside. Walls scanned inch by inch. They were patient. They did not hurry. Lyra understood. They thought she had already fled. This was confirmation protocol. Beside her, the human remained perfectly still. But Lyra could feel something shifting in him. The initial shock was fading. Questions were forming, and beneath the questions, something harder was taking shape. Anger. These intruders had violated his space, his home, the sanctuary he had built for himself in his grief. And they had done it without permission, without hesitation, as if he did not matter at all. Lyra felt that anger like heat. In the bedroom below, one of the collectors paused near the dresser. It picked up the photograph of the man and the woman with kind eyes, examining it with inhuman curiosity before setting it down carelessly. The human's breathing changed, just slightly, but Lyra heard it. She turned her head slowly in the darkness. Even without full light, her eyes could see his face. The muscles in his jaw were tight. His hand had moved back to where his weapon would be if he had brought it. Lyra reached out carefully and placed her hand on his arm. She had studied human touch, knew it could communicate what words could not. She applied gentle pressure. "Wait," that touch said. "Not yet." He looked at her. In the almost darkness, their eyes met. She saw the question there. Who are you? What have you brought into my home? She had no way to answer, not now, not here. But she held his gaze and let him see what she hoped he would understand. I am afraid. I am desperate. I am asking you to trust me when I have given you no reason to. Something passed between them, not understanding, not yet, but acknowledgement. The human gave a single small nod. Below them, the collectors completed their sweep. They communicated in clipped phrases coordinating their search pattern. Then they left as silently as they had come, the pressure in the air dissipating as they exited the building. But Lyra knew better than to move. She held up one hand, finger spread. 5 minutes. The collectors would leave monitoring drones in the area. They would watch for exactly the kind of relieved movement that prey made when they thought the danger had passed. The human seemed to understand. He settled into position beside her, his breathing returning to that slow, controlled rhythm. They waited. Lyra used the time to assess her situation. Her wound had stopped bleeding, but it was not healing. Her dampener was destroyed. Her emergency beacon had been compromised when the collectors first detected her. She was alone on a planet she had only studied from afar, hunted by professionals who never failed with no resources except the kindness of a stranger. The strategic part of her mind calculated her chances of survival. 0.3%. The human part of her mind, the part she had developed through months of watching this species, thought something different. Not zero. Never zero. Humans prove that every day. 5 minutes passed, then 10 to be safe. Finally, Lyra moved. She crawled forward through the narrow maintenance space, feeling the human follow behind her. The crawl space extended farther than she had expected, branching off into service tunnels that threaded through the old building's infrastructure. Boston had been built and rebuilt over centuries. Its buildings were full of forgotten spaces, emergency routes, cable runs, and maintenance access that had been patched over and modified so many times that no single blueprint showed them all. Lyra had studied this during her research. Human cities were messy, redundant, layered with contradictions, perfect for hiding. They emerged eventually into a small utility room 2 floors below, filled with electrical panels and copper pipes green with age. The human moved to the door and listened carefully before opening it a crack. The hallway beyond was dark. Emergency lights flickered weakly, barely functional. They shut down power to isolate the building, Lyra said quietly, her first words since entering his apartment. The human turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. In the dim emergency lighting, Lyra knew what he was seeing. She had chosen a form that would read as female to human perception, though her species did not divide quite that way. Her features were humanoid enough to avoid triggering instinctive fear responses, but different enough that no one would mistake her for human. Her skin held a faint luminescence that became more visible in darkness. Her eyes were larger than human proportion, adapted for low-light environments, and her shoulder was stained with silver blood that had soaked through the fabric covering it. "You're hurt," he said. "Yes." "Who are you?" Lyra hesitated. How did she explain? Where did she even begin? "My name is Lyra," she said finally. "I am a xenolinguist. I studied developing species to understand how they might integrate into galactic society." "Galactic society," the human repeated, his voice flat. "Yes. And those things that just destroyed my apartment. Collectors, bounty hunters, they work for the syndicate." "Why are they hunting you?" Lyra met his eyes. "Because I discovered something about your species that makes powerful beings very uncomfortable." The human waited. "Humans are invisible," Lyra continued, "to predictive models, to control systems. Your minds generate too many variables, cycle through too many contradictory thoughts simultaneously. Where others see disorder, I saw adaptation, and the syndicate does not appreciate being proven wrong." She saw something shift in his expression. Not belief, not yet, but consideration. "What's your name?" Lyra asked. The human was silent for a moment. Then Garrett Thorne. "Garrett," Lyra repeated, feeling the shape of the name. "You were military." "No. Marine Corps, long time ago. Intelligence specialist, Iraq. Fallujah 2004. Garrett's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" "I scanned you before I entered your apartment. I needed someone who could think in patterns that alien technology could not predict. You are exceptional in that regard." Exceptional, Garrett said, and there was something bitter in his tone. That's one word for it. He moved to the utility room door and checked the hallway again. We can't stay here. If they're watching the building, they'll eventually expand their search pattern. I know. Can they track you? Not without my dampener. It is destroyed, but they will be mapping human behavior patterns. How people respond to power outages, how they evacuate, where they go. So we do something they won't predict. Lyra felt a flicker of something like hope. Yes. Garrett turned back to her. Why did you come to me, specifically out of everyone in this city? Why my apartment? Lyra considered lying. It would be easier. But this man had already hidden her from collectors when he had no reason to trust her. No obligation to help. He deserved truth. You're mine, she said. I could sense it from blocks away. You think in spirals, memories in present moment, in fear and determination all tangled together. It is the most complex cognitive pattern I have detected on this planet. Garrett stared at her. You chose me because I'm a mess. I chose you because you are human in the most fundamental sense. You carry pain, but you continue forward. You have lost, but you still care. You are exactly what makes your species impossible to predict or control. Something changed in Garrett's face. The wariness remained, but it was joined by something else. Recognition, perhaps? Or resignation. I spent 20 years in intelligence work, he said. I've seen things that made no sense. Investigated phenomena that officially don't exist. I learned a long time ago that impossible is just a word people use when they don't have enough information. He looked at the silver blood on her shoulder. We need to get you somewhere safer. And you need to tell me everything. Starting with why those collectors aren't just hunting you. Why they cut power to an entire section of the city. Lyra felt her chest tighten. She had hoped to avoid this conversation, but Garrett deserved to know what helping her would cost. Come with me, she said. I will show you. They moved through the building carefully using emergency stairwells that Garrett seemed to know instinctively would be empty. He moved like someone who had spent years operating in hostile territory, checking corners, listening at doors, leaving no evidence of their passage. They reached the roof access. Garrett pushed the door open and rain hit them immediately. Cold, heavy drops that had started falling while they hid. The city spread out below them, dark and wounded power out in concentric circles spreading from Garrett's building. But that was not what made Garrett stop moving. Above them, barely visible through the rain, something shimmered. It was a grid, faint lines of energy forming a perfect geometric pattern across the sky centered directly over downtown Boston. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat that did not belong to Earth. Lyra watched Garrett's face as he processed what he was seeing. The training that had let him stay calm in the apartment was fracturing. This was too big, too undeniable. What is that? He asked, voice tight. Lyra stepped beside him, rain soaking through her clothes, mixing with the silver blood on her shoulder. It is called a containment grid, she said. The collectors are not just hunting me, Garrett. They are running an experiment. What kind of experiment? Lyra turned to face him fully. They are testing whether humans can be controlled, whether your cities can be isolated, whether your spontaneous responses can be contained. This is phase 1 of human observation protocol. The rain fell harder. Garrett looked from the grid to her, then back to the grid. How many cities? He asked. Lyra had hoped he would not ask that, but she had promised him truth. I detected similar signatures in New York before I fled. Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago. The syndicate is not testing one city. They are testing your entire species simultaneously. Garrett was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very calm, the kind of calm that came before violence or surrender. They're treating us like lab rats. Yes. How long has this been happening? The grids activated 27 minutes ago, the same time the collectors located me. This is not coincidence. My research was classified as dangerous because it proved humans are ungovernable. The syndicate wants to prove me wrong. And if they succeed, Lyra met his eyes. The rain ran down both their faces. If humans behave predictably under stress, if you panic in measurable patterns, if you submit to containment, then you will be categorized as controllable. And controllable species are resources to be exploited. And if we don't submit, Then you will be categorized as threats to be eliminated. Garrett looked up at the grid again. Lyra watched him process the impossible situation, watched him cycle through the same calculations she had already run. There was no good outcome here, only degrees of disaster. But then Garrett did something Lyra had not predicted. He laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was bitter and tired and angry, but it was genuine. You know what the really funny part is, he said. I've spent 3 years trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, wondering if anything I did mattered anymore. If I mattered. He looked at her. Guess I got my answer. Lyra felt something twist in her chest, an emotion she did not have a word for in her own language, but humans would call it guilt. I am sorry, she said. I should have kept running, led them away from population centers. But I was afraid and I was hurt and I made a selfish choice. You asked for help, Garrett said. That's not selfish. That's human. I am not human. No, Garrett agreed, but you understand us better than we understand ourselves. That's what got you in trouble, isn't it? Lyra nodded slowly. Garrett looked back at the city, the grid pulsed above it. Somewhere out there, millions of people were waking up to darkness, to questions, to fear, and they had no idea what was really happening. We need to get off this roof, Garrett said, and we need a plan. I have no resources, no support, no way to fight collectors or challenge syndicate authority. Maybe not, Garrett said, but you said it yourself. Humans are invisible to prediction models. We don't behave the way your systems expect. He started moving toward the roof access, then paused. You came here because you believed in something about us, something that scared your superiors enough to send hunters after you. What was it exactly? Lyra thought about her years of research, about watching humans respond to disasters with spontaneous coordination, about seeing them sacrifice for strangers, about witnessing them turn disadvantage into advantage through sheer stubborn creativity. I believed, she said carefully, that humans would rather die free than live controlled, and that your unpredictability is not weakness, it is your greatest strength. Garrett nodded once. Then let's prove it. They descended back into the building. Behind them, the grid pulsed on, counting down to something neither of them could quite name. But for the first time since the collectors had found her, Lyra felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. And in the determined, scarred, complicated human standing beside her, she felt something that her species had lost millennia ago, in their pursuit of perfect order. She felt hope. The underground parking garage smelled like motor oil and decades of water damage. Garrett led Lyra through shadows between concrete pillars, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who had navigated worse places under worse circumstances. His hand stayed near his waistband, where Lyra knew he kept a weapon he had retrieved from a hidden cache in the stairwell. He had not drawn it, but he had not relaxed either. They reached a maintenance office tucked into the garage's northeast corner. The door was locked with a chain that looked rusted shut, but Garrett produced a key from somewhere and the chain fell away cleanly. Inside the office was exactly what Lyra expected from human infrastructure. Cluttered, outdated, forgotten, perfect. Garrett moved directly to a metal desk in the corner and pulled aside a filing cabinet to reveal an old computer tower connected to cables that disappeared into the wall. He powered it on, and the machine wheezed to life with sounds that suggested it should not still be functional. Friend of mine worked building maintenance here about 10 years back, Garrett said, typing commands into a terminal screen that flickered green text. Helped him map emergency systems for the city after 9/11. Boston's infrastructure is a patchwork of redundant networks that don't talk to each other properly. Old systems, new systems, backup systems that were supposed to be temporary but became permanent. The screen populated with overlapping diagrams that meant nothing to Lyra's eyes but clearly meant everything to Garrett's. Why are you showing me this? Lyra asked. Garrett glanced at her. You said humans are unpredictable, that our emergent behavior is what your people can't control. I'm showing you what that looks like when weaponized. He pulled up another screen. Traffic management systems, emergency broadcast networks, hospital alert protocols, power grid subsections. Everything connected in ways that were never meant to be connected, jury-rigged over years of budget cuts and bureaucratic shortcuts. Your collectors rely on predictive models, Garrett continued. They expect humans to panic in measurable ways during a crisis. Expected evacuation patterns, Expected communication breakdowns, expected behavior. His fingers moved across the keyboard, so we give them unexpected. Lyra watched as Garrett began executing commands that sent false alerts cascading through Boston's emergency systems. Fire alarms triggered in buildings across 12 different districts. Traffic signals switched to conflicting patterns that would create gridlock at major intersections. Hospital emergency protocols activated for incidents that did not exist. Within minutes, the city's response infrastructure was flooded with contradictory information. They will recalibrate, Lyra said quietly. The syndicate's systems adapt quickly. Maybe, Garrett replied, but they are not adapting to one variable. They're adapting to millions. He pulled up a social media monitoring feed. Already posts were appearing, confused residents asking neighbors what was happening, videos of traffic disorder, questions about the power outage, theories spreading faster than facts. Garrett typed something and sent it anonymously into multiple message threads, not official, not traceable, just information dropped into the flow. Aliens, not friendly, trust people, not systems. Lyra stared at the screen. You are deliberately creating informational cascade. I'm creating noise, Garrett corrected. Humans are good at noise. We talk, we share, we speculate. And when we're scared, we don't just panic, we connect. He was right. Lyra watched the feeds populate in real time. People were not evacuating in orderly patterns. They were calling each other, checking on neighbors, sharing information. The interference Garrett had initiated was being amplified by human social behavior in ways no predictive model could have anticipated. Her people had studied humanity for generations. They had models for human panic, human submission, human violence. But they had never properly modeled human communication under stress because it defied algorithmic prediction. Above them, through cracks in the garage ceiling, Lyra felt the containment grid flicker. Just once, just for a moment, but it meant the syndicate's systems were struggling to process the data flood. It is working, Lyra whispered. Garrett did not smile. His face remained focused on the screens, watching feeds, adjusting variables, keeping the cascade flowing, but controlled enough not to cause actual harm. How long until they adapt? He asked. Lyra calculated. 12 minutes, perhaps 15 if we are fortunate. Then we need to move before then. He started shutting down the terminal, covering their digital tracks, with the same methodical care he had shown in everything else. Lyra noticed his hands were steady. No tremor, no hesitation. You have done this before, she said. Created information warfare. Garrett paused. Different context, different enemy, but the principle's the same. When you can't match force, you create confusion. He looked at her directly. You asked me for help. That means you're part of this now, so I need to know. What exactly did your research discover that scared them so badly? Lyra had known this question would come. She owed him truth. For 3 years I observed Earth, she began. I studied how humans respond to crisis, natural disasters, economic collapse, war, pandemic, every major stress event in your recent history. She moved closer to the desk, her shoulder aching but manageable. The syndicate's models predicted that humans would fragment under sustained pressure, that your tribal instincts would override cooperation, that disorder would lead to collapse. But it didn't, Garrett said. It did the opposite. Every time your species faced extinction-level pressure, you adapted. Strangers helped strangers. Resources were shared. Innovation accelerated. You did not become more orderly. You became more coordinated through voluntary action rather than imposed structure. Lyra felt emotion creeping into her voice and did not try to suppress it. I wrote a paper. I presented evidence that humans could never be controlled through traditional means because your strength comes from your unpredictability, from your ability to care about beings you have never met, from your stubborn insistence that hope is logical even when all data suggests otherwise. And they classified that as dangerous, Garrett finished. They classified it as impossible. They said I had been compromised by proximity to my subjects, that I had lost objectivity. When I refused to recant my findings, they sold my location to collectors. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. Thank you. Lyra blinked. For what? for seeing us, really seeing us, not as problems to solve or threats to manage, as people. Before Lyra could respond, a sharp tone cut through the air. High-pitched, directional, a scanner. Close. Garrett moved instantly, killing the computer's power and pulling Lyra toward the office's back corner. There was a ventilation grate there large enough for a person. He had it open in seconds. Through, he whispered. They crawled into the ductwork just as the office door exploded inward with that same pressure wave force the collectors used. Lyra heard them enter, heard the methodical sweep of their equipment. But this time something was different. The scanner sounds were wrong, confused. The human interference Garrett had created across the city was generating too much noise for their systems to filter cleanly. They were getting false positives everywhere. Garrett and Lyra crawled through the ventilation system, moving away from the office, heading deeper into the building's infrastructure. Behind them, the collectors continued their search, but Lyra could hear the frustration in their clipped communication. They were losing certainty. The ventilation shaft opened eventually into a larger service corridor. Garrett dropped down first, then helped Lyra descend. Her shoulders screamed in protest, but she made no sound. They were in a tunnel that ran beneath the street level, old subway infrastructure that had been abandoned when newer lines were built. The walls were brick, water-stained and crumbling. Emergency lights provided minimal visibility. Garrett checked both directions, then chose one and started moving. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked. "Somewhere they won't predict." They walked in silence for several minutes. Lyra's enhanced hearing picked up sounds from the city above. Traffic disruption from Garrett's interference. Sirens responding to false alarms. And underneath it all, something else. Voices, thousands of voices, millions, talking, questioning, sharing information across networks the syndicate had never properly mapped because they dismissed human social media as meaningless noise. But it was not noise. It was coordination masquerading as disorder. "Garrett," Lyra said quietly, "something is happening." He stopped. "What?" "The grid. It is fluctuating more severely. The syndicate's systems are struggling to maintain predictive coherence." "Is that good or bad?" "I do not know. They may withdraw to reassess, or they may escalate." Garrett considered this. Then he pulled out his phone. One bar of signal, flickering but present. "We need allies," he said. "People who will believe what's happening and have resources to help." "Who would believe you?" Garrett's expression was grim. "Someone who's been waiting 20 years for proof she wasn't crazy." He typed a message and sent it into encrypted channels Lyra's passive sensors detected, but could not read. Then they waited. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A response. Garrett read it, and some of the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "We have a meet point," he said. 30 minutes. Can you make it that far?" Lyra assessed her physical state. Her wound had stopped bleeding, but it was not healing properly in Earth's atmosphere. She was exhausted. Her natural luminescence was dimming, which meant her energy reserves were depleting. But she nodded. "I can make it." They emerged from the abandoned tunnel into a different section of the city. The containment grid was visible here, too pulsing with increasing irregularity. Whatever Garrett had done was cascading beyond his initial interference. People were outside now despite the late hour. Some filming the sky. Others gathered in groups talking, sharing phone screens, trying to make sense of incompatible information. No one was panicking. They were questioning. Lyra watched a young couple help an elderly man who had fallen on wet pavement. Watched strangers share umbrellas with people they did not know. Watched a woman giving directions to confused tourists while simultaneously filming the strange lights above. Humans helping humans while their world shifted around them. "This is what I tried to explain," Lyra said softly. "This is what the syndicate cannot understand." Garrett followed her gaze. "We're messy, but we show up for each other. It is more than that. You optimize for care rather than efficiency. It should make you weak. Instead, it makes you resilient." They kept moving, staying to side streets, avoiding main roads where collector drones might be scanning. Garrett navigated with the confidence of someone who knew this city intimately. The meeting point was an MIT research building, dark and officially closed. But a side entrance opened as they approached, and a woman stepped out. She was in her early 50s, gray hair pulled back severely, wearing clothes that suggested she had dressed in a hurry. But her eyes were sharp and assessing as she took in Garrett and then focused on Lyra with an intensity that made Lyra unconsciously straighten. Garrett Thorne, the woman said, you have exactly 2 minutes to convince me this isn't an elaborate breakdown. Rebecca, Garrett replied. This is Lyra. She's not human. Those lights in the sky are real. And we need your help. The woman, Rebecca, stared at Lyra for a long moment. Then she stepped Wasin Weisstrom. Get inside now. They entered the building and Rebecca locked the door behind them with multiple mechanisms. She led them through dark corridors to a basement level that Lyra's sensors indicated was heavily shielded. A laboratory occupied most of the space. But it was not an official lab. The equipment was mismatched, cobbled together from different sources. Screens displayed data streams that Lyra recognized as signal intercepts. Someone had been monitoring for non-terrestrial communications. How long? Lyra asked, gesturing to the setup. Rebecca turned. How long have I been listening for proof we're not alone? 23 years. Since I investigated atmospheric anomalies at Hanscom Air Force Base that officially didn't exist. She moved to a workstation and started pulling up files. I know who you are, Garrett. Marine Corps intelligence discharged honorably. Wife died of cancer 3 years ago. You've been living quiet ever since. What I don't know is why you're bringing an actual alien to my door. Because she asked for help, Garrett said simply, and because what's happening tonight is bigger than both of us. Rebecca looked at Lyra again. Prove it. Prove you're what he says. Lyra stepped forward. She was exhausted and hurt and running out of options. But this human woman deserved evidence. She held out her injured arm and allowed her biological controls to slip. The silver blood began to glow, casting light across the laboratory. Then she touched Rebecca's computer system, an interface directly pulling up data streams that should have required passwords and security clearances. The grid above your city is a containment field, Lyra said, her voice steady despite her fatigue. Similar fields are active over New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Chicago. They are testing human behavioral response to isolation and control. Rebecca's face had gone very still. She looked at the data Lyra was displaying, comparing it to her own signal intercepts. You're reading classified satellite telemetry, Rebecca said. Yes. And you're saying those grids are what? Some kind of cage. Phase 1 observation protocols. If humans respond predictably to stress, you will be classified as controllable. If you do not, you will be classified as threats requiring suppression. Rebecca absorbed this. She had clearly run this scenario in her head before. Another person entered the lab, male mid-40s wearing rumpled clothes that suggested he had been sleeping here. He stopped when he saw Lyra. Simon, Rebecca said without looking away from her screens. Meet our guest. She's exactly what you've been hypothesizing. The man Simon approached slowly. He was looking at Lyra with an expression that mixed wonder and scientific hunger. Dr. Simon Aldrich, he introduced himself. Theoretical physics, xenosignal analysis, and apparently terrible at predicting when first contact would actually happen. Despite everything, Lyra felt the corner of her mouth lift slightly. Humans. Even in crisis, they found space for humor. Lyra, she replied, xenolinguist, currently wanted by multiple galactic authorities for suggesting your species is ungovernable. Simon blinked. Then he laughed sharp and slightly hysterical. I like her, he said to Rebecca. Can we keep her? Focus, Simon, Rebecca ordered. She was pulling up more data now, correlating signal intercepts with the information Lyra had provided. Her fingers moved quickly across multiple keyboards simultaneously. If what you're showing me is accurate, this isn't just observation, Rebecca said. This is the precursor to something bigger. Yes, Lyra confirmed. The syndicate does not act without purpose. They are establishing whether Earth can be integrated into their systems, whether humans can be predicted and therefore controlled. And your research said we can't be, Garrett added, which is why they're testing it themselves, Rebecca finished. She spun in her chair to face them fully. How much time do we have? Lyra calculated quickly. The grids have been active for 47 minutes. Observation protocols typically run for 2 to 4 hours before preliminary conclusions are drawn. But the interference you have created is disrupting their data collection. Good, Rebecca said. Then we disrupt it more. She stood and moved to a communications array. I have contacts, military intelligence, civilian research networks, people who've been waiting for proof just like I have. If we coordinate, if we amplify the signal, They will panic, Lyra interrupted. Human authorities will impose order to appear in control. That is exactly what the syndicate predicts. Then we don't go through official channels, Simon said. He was already pulling up displays showing social media networks, communication platforms, civilian coordination tools. We go around them. Garrett moved closer to the screens. Lyra saw the tactical part of his mind engaging with the problem. You're talking about deliberate information cascade, he said, using human social networks to spread awareness and coordinate response before governments can shut it down. Exactly, Simon replied. We show people what's in the sky, we give them just enough information to ask the right questions, and we trust them to do what humans do best. Communicate, Lyra said quietly. Organize, Rebecca added. Adapt, Garrett finished. They looked at each other, three humans and one alien in a basement laboratory, planning to amplify the very unpredictability that made humanity ungovernable. It should not work. By every logical calculation, it would doomed to fail. But Lyra had studied humans long enough to know that logic was not their primary operating system. Hope was. If we do this, Lyra said carefully, there is no going back. The syndicate will know humans are aware of observation. They will accelerate their timeline. This could trigger phase 2. Which is what, Rebecca asked? Escalation. Either diplomatic containment or military suppression, depending on how they classify the threat. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Garrett spoke. Lyra came to Earth because she believed in something about us. She put her life at risk because she saw us as worth defending. I say we prove her right. Rebecca nodded once. Agreed. Simon was already typing. I can have the first wave of information out in under 10 minutes. Encrypted channels, anonymous sources distributed across multiple platforms. Make it real, Rebecca said. No conspiracy theory language. Just facts. Videos. Data. Let people draw their own conclusions. Lyra watched them work. Three humans coordinating effortlessly, each bringing different skills, none requiring formal hierarchy or command structure. They simply moved together like water, finding downhill paths. Spontaneous coordination, beautiful, effective. Within minutes, the first post went live. Strange lights over Boston. Video from New York showing similar phenomena. Atmospheric data that did not match natural patterns. Signal intercepts in frequency ranges that should not exist. Not sensationalized, just presented as questions seeking answers. And humans responded. Scientists offered analysis. Astronomers compared observations. Engineers proposed explanations. Artists created visualizations. And ordinary people shared everything, commented, connected the dots in ways that created a picture no single person could have drawn alone. The containment grid over Boston flickered more violently. Lyra felt it through her biosensors. The syndicate's prediction engines were being overwhelmed by data that refused to fit expected patterns. It is working, she said, wonder creeping into her voice. They cannot model this. Too many variables, too many unpredictable human choices happening simultaneously. Rebecca pulled up a global map showing social media activity. Bright spots appeared where conversations about the phenomena were clustering. Boston, New York, Los Angeles, but also London, Tokyo, Sydney, Berlin. It's going worldwide, Simon said. Not just the cities with grids. Everyone's asking questions now. Garrett stood beside Lyra, watching the cascade of human communication spreading across the planet. Your people thought we were primitive, he said quietly, that our disorder was weakness. They were wrong, Lyra replied. Your spontaneous cooperation is coordination they cannot comprehend. You do not move as one mind. You move as millions of minds choosing voluntary action without coercion. Above them, the grid pulsed erratically, and somewhere in orbit, Lyra knew the syndicate was recalculating everything they thought they knew about humanity. The experiment was failing, but that meant something worse was coming. Rebecca's expression had grown serious as she monitored military channels. We're getting unusual traffic, high-level encrypted communications. Something's changed. Lyra felt it too, a shift in the grid's frequency, a new pattern emerging. They are transitioning protocols, she said quietly. Phase 2 is beginning. Simon looked up from his screens. What does that mean? Lyra met their eyes each in turn. It means they are sending an envoy, someone to make official contact, to offer humanity a choice that is not really a choice at all. Garrett's jaw tightened. When, soon, they will want to appear reasonable, to create the illusion of diplomacy before they act. Rebecca stood, her military bearing fully engaged now. Then we prepared to meet them, on our terms, not theirs. She began issuing instructions, coordinating with her contacts, establishing protocols. But she paused and looked at Lyra. You're the only one who understands their psychology. We need you visible. We need them to see that you chose us. Lyra felt something tighten in her chest. Fear, purpose, both at once. They will declare me rogue, compromised by proximity to humans. Good, Garrett said. Let them see what happens when someone gets close enough to actually understand us. Lyra looked at her injured shoulder, at her depleted energy reserves, at the humans around her who were preparing to face an empire that had existed for millennia before Earth developed language. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt ready. My wound, she said to Rebecca. Do you have medical supplies? Rebecca moved immediately, pulling out a comprehensive field kit. She examined Lyra's injury with professional efficiency. Simon, help me with this. Alien biology or not, that needs treatment. 10 minutes later, Lyra's shoulder was bandaged with human medical supplies that would not heal her properly but would stop the bleeding and stabilize the tissue. The pain receded to manageable levels. It will suffice, Lyra said. Thank you. Rebecca nodded, already moving back to her communications array. We've got confirmation. Multiple sources detecting atmospheric entry. Something's coming down. On the screens, the grids over all 5 cities were exhibiting the same behavior, contracting from broad coverage to focus points. They're establishing landing zones, Simon said, tracking the patterns. Garrett checked his weapon, his movements automatic and practiced. Where, Trey? Boston grid is converging on MIT campus, Rebecca replied, specifically about 200 meters from this building. She looked at them, her expression grim but determined. They're coming to us. Question is, are we ready for them? Lyra stood, feeling the human bandage tight against her shoulder, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. No one is ever ready for first contact, she said, but you are as prepared as any species has ever been, because you have something the Syndicate does not. What's that? Simon asked. Lyra looked at each of them, Garrett scarred by loss but still standing. Rebecca, who had waited decades for this moment. Simon, who approached the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. Each other, she said simply. Above them, the sky began to change, and humanity prepared to meet the galaxy on their own terms. The sky changed at dawn. Lyra felt it before anyone saw it. A pressure shift in the atmosphere, a frequency change in the grids pulsing. She stood in Rebecca's laboratory, exhausted but alert, watching the screens that showed humanity's response continuing to cascade across every network, every platform, every language. Something is happening, she said quietly. Garrett looked up from where he had been coordinating with Rebecca. His face showed the fatigue of a man who had not slept, but his eyes remained sharp. Rebecca was already moving to the roof access. If they're making contact, I want eyes on it. Simon, keep broadcasting. The world needs to see this. They climbed to MYT's rooftop observation deck. Rebecca had called in people she trusted, creating a perimeter that was protection without appearing militaristic. Garrett stood beside Lyra, his presence steady and grounding. Simon set up broadcasting equipment, linking to every platform that would carry the feed. Millions were already watching. The grid stabilized above Boston. All the erratic fluctuations ceased. The pulsing became steady, controlled, deliberate. And then it began to retract, pulling back from the city edges, condensing into a single point of brilliant light directly overhead. They are withdrawing observation protocols, Lyra said, her voice tight with concern. This is not retreat. This is transition. The point of light descended slowly, gracefully, projecting brilliance that seemed to soften the morning sun rather than compete with it. As it drew closer, Lyra could make out the shape beneath the light. A spacecraft. Nothing like the brutal efficiency of collector vessels. This was elegant, perfect, designed to inspire awe rather than fear. A platform extended from its base, touching down on the rooftop 50 meters from where they stood. An envoy Kyle stepped into Earth's atmosphere. He was tall, luminescent like Lyra, but more refined somehow. His features were symmetrical to the point of artificiality. His robes flowed as if underwater material that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could properly perceive. He looked at the assembled humans with an expression of benign patience. Then his eyes found Lyra. Something flickered across his perfect features. Disappointment, confirmation of suspicions. Lyra of the Xenolinguist Corps. Kale said, his voice resonating in frequencies that made Lyra's bones ache. You stand accused of cultural contamination, species advocacy, abandonment of scientific objectivity. Every word was being broadcast, translated automatically by technology that analyzed and rendered meaning in real time across every human language. Billions were watching now. Lyra stepped forward. Her shoulders still ached beneath the human bandage. Her energy reserves were nearly depleted. But she stood straight, meeting Kale's gaze without flinching. I stand accused, she said clearly, of telling the truth about humanity, of refusing to falsify research that contradicted syndicate predictions, of proving that this species cannot be controlled through your standard models. Kale tilted his head in a gesture that mimicked human curiosity, but felt empty. You speak as if these accusations are unjust. You violated first contact protocols. You shared classified information with a developing species. You have compromised decades of observational study. I compromised nothing, Lyra replied. I completed my research. The syndicate simply did not like my conclusions. Kale turned to address the cameras, the watching world. Humanity of Earth, I am Envoy Kale of the Galactic Syndicate. We apologize for the disturbance to your cities. We came seeking a rogue operative who has been spreading dangerous misinformation about our intentions. His voice was soothing, reasonable, the voice of authority explaining away children's nightmares. We mean you no harm. We have observed your species with interest for generations, waiting for the proper time to make formal contact. That time is not yet here. Your development must proceed naturally without interference. He gestured toward Lyra with something like sadness. This individual has violated that principle. Return her to our custody, and we will withdraw. Your lives will continue undisturbed. You have our assurance, Marwan. The offer hung in the air. Lyra felt Garrett shift beside her, tension radiating from his body, but he did not speak. This was not his moment, it was hers. Lyra walked forward past Rebecca's security perimeter, past Simon's cameras, until she stood directly before Kale. You speak of assurances, she said, her voice carrying across the rooftop and into the feeds broadcasting to billions. Tell them the truth, Kale. Tell them about the containment grids, about the behavioral testing, about Phase 1 observation protocols. Kale's expression did not change, but Lyra saw the calculation in his eyes. Precautionary measures, he said smoothly, to ensure this rogue element had not compromised your development with premature technological exposure. Lies, Lyra said flatly. The grids were testing human response to isolation and control. You were measuring how quickly they would panic, how efficiently they could be managed, whether they would submit to authority or fragment into disorder. She turned to face the cameras, to face the billions of humans watching. I spent 3 years studying your species. I watched how you respond to disasters, how you organize during crisis, how you sacrifice for strangers and create beauty in suffering. And I wrote a report that stated a simple truth: humans cannot be controlled through predictive modeling because you are fundamentally, beautifully, impossibly spontaneous in your coordination. Lyra's voice grew stronger, fueled by months of suppressed truth. The syndicate rejected my findings. They said I had lost objectivity, that I had been compromised by my subjects. So they tested it themselves. They caged your cities and watched to see if you would behave according to their models. She gestured to the sky, to the retreating grid. And you did not. You questioned, you communicated, you coordinated without central authority. You proved that voluntary cooperation and emergent behavior are not opposites. They are partners. Kale's composure finally cracked slightly. You are emotional, irrational. You have been corrupted by proximity to a species that values feelings over logic. No, Lyra said. I have been educated by a species that understands feelings are not separate from logic. That caring about each other is not weakness. It is the foundation of survival. She took another step toward him. You came here thinking humans would surrender me to save themselves. That is what your models predicted. Self-interest over principle. But you do not understand them at all. Garrett moved then, not confrontationally but deliberately. He stood beside Lyra facing KO. She's right, he said, his voice rough but clear. You expected us to panic, to submit, to behave like we needed your permission to exist. Rebecca joined them on Lyra's other side. But we don't, she added, and we won't. Simon stepped forward with his equipment still broadcasting. You showed yourselves, he said simply. That was your mistake. Around the rooftop, others began moving forward. Rebecca's contacts, scientists, military personnel, civilians who had been watching and decided to be present. They did not surround Cahill threateningly. They simply stood. Witness, solidarity, and across every screen on Earth, others stood too. In their homes, on their streets, in their cities, not organized by governments, not commanded by authorities, just humans choosing together. Cale watched this with something approaching confusion. This is irrational, he said. She is not your species. She owes you nothing. You owe her nothing. There is no logical reason for this response. Lyra felt something break open inside her chest. Not pain, something else. Understanding. That, she said softly, is exactly why you will never control them. Because they do not require logic to choose kindness. They do not need permission to care. They simply do, and that makes them more powerful than your entire empire. Cale's eyes narrowed. You believe this display of emotion constitutes strength. This is why your research was classified as dangerous. You have forgotten that order precedes disorder. Control precedes freedom. We built civilizations while humans were barely sentient. And we remained sentient while you became machines, Lyra Roy replied. You optimized away everything that made existence worth living. Humans retained it. That is why they will survive long after your perfect empire collapses from its own rigidity. Silence stretched across the rooftop. Then Cale spoke again, his voice colder now. This planet will be reclassified. Your behavior today will be analyzed. Appropriate responses will be determined. Threats, Garrett said. That's what people resort to when they're scared. Cale turned sharply. We do not fear you. Then why come with warnings? Rebecca asked. Why diplomatic theater? If we're so beneath you, why not just act? Cale did not answer. Because he could not. The truth was visible in his silence. The syndicate was afraid, not of human weapons, not of human technology, but of human unpredictability, of a species that could coordinate without control, that could adapt faster than prediction models could update. Lyra saw it clearly now. You cannot risk war with humanity, she said, because you cannot predict how they will respond. Your weapons are superior, yes, but your strategies depend on enemies behaving logically, and humans optimize for different variables entirely. She stepped closer to Cale. I came here begging one human for help when I had nothing. No resources, no leverage, no reason for him to risk himself, and he helped me anyway. Then others helped, then millions. Not because I earned it, not because it benefited them, but because someone asked and they chose to answer. Lyra's voice carried across every broadcast. That is what you fear. Not human disorder, human choice. The choice to care. The choice to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The choice to believe hope is stronger than control. Cale's form began to shimmer, preparing to withdraw. This conversation is over. The syndicate will respond as it sees fit. No, Lyra said. You will retreat. You will reclassify Earth as ungovernable. You will mark it as too dangerous for direct intervention. Because you know now what I proved in my research. She stood tall despite her exhaustion. Humans do not need to be stronger than you to defeat you. They only need to remain more human than you can predict. Cale's eyes locked with hers one final time. You have chosen them over your own kind. That choice will have consequences. I have chosen my kind, Lyra replied. Those who believe survival means helping each other, not controlling each other. If that makes me human, then I am proud to be compromised. The Envoy platform began retracting. Kale ascended with it, his perfect form dissolving back into the spacecraft. But before the vessel departed, Lyra heard the signal, a transmission on frequencies only her species could detect. A recall order, not for her, for all Syndicate observation assets, including the collectors who had been hunting her. Earth was being reclassified, not as controllable, not as primitive, as threat level maximum. The spacecraft rose into the sky and disappeared beyond atmosphere. The grid over Boston dissolved completely, leaving only normal dawn light. For several seconds, no one on the rooftop moved. Then Garrett laughed. It was quiet at first, disbelief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something like joy. Then Rebecca joined him and Simon and the others until the rooftop was filled with the sound of humans releasing tension they had held for hours. Lyra stood in the center of it, feeling the emotion wash over her through her. This was humanity. Not perfect, not ordered, but alive in ways her species had forgotten how to be. Garrett moved beside her, his expression serious despite the laughter around them. "You know they'll come back eventually," he said quietly. "This isn't over." "No," Lyra agreed, "but humanity has time now. Time to prepare, time to understand what they face." "And you?" Rebecca asked, approaching with Simon. "What happens to you?" Lyra felt the recall order still resonating in her awareness, an invitation to return, to submit to judgment, to accept whatever consequences awaited. She could go. The Syndicate would provide transport if she surrendered. She could face her people, accept punishment, maybe even eventually return to research properly supervised. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. Lyra looked at Garrett, at Rebecca and Simon, at the humans around her who had stood in solidarity with someone they barely knew. "I choose to stay," she said. Garrett's expression softened. "You sure we're going to be a lot of work?" "I am certain. I asked you for help when I had nothing. You gave me everything. I will not abandon that." Rebecca nodded once military acceptance of a decision made. "Then we need to prepare you a cover identity, documentation, somewhere to live." "She can stay with me," Garrett said. "Apartment's already destroyed. Might as well rebuild it for two." Simon grinned. "Plus she needs someone to teach her about human spontaneity firsthand. You're basically a chaos specialist, Garrett." Despite everything, Lyra smiled. Around the world, the broadcasts were still running. Not government statements, not official press conferences, just humans talking to each other. Scientists analyzing what had happened, artists creating interpretations, ordinary people sharing their experiences. A 16-year-old girl in Houston had posted a video that was approaching 1 billion views. She stood on her rooftop filming the dissolving grid and asked a simple question. If aliens are so advanced, why are they scared of us? The answers flooding in were as varied as humanity itself. But one theme emerged across languages and cultures and continents. Because we choose each other. Because we don't ask permission to care. Because we coordinate through voluntary action, and that's more powerful than any imposed order. Lyra watched the feeds with wonder. "They understand," she whispered. "They may not know the technical details, but they understand the core truth." "Of course they do," Garrett said. "It's who we are." Rebecca was already organizing next steps, coordinating with military contacts to establish monitoring protocols, working with Simon to create an early warning network for future alien activity, building infrastructure for the reality that Earth was no longer hidden. But she paused and looked at Lyra. "You said you spent 3 years studying us. What do you think happens next?" Lyra considered carefully. "The Syndicate will observe from a distance. They will update their models, though those models will never be accurate. Other civilizations will hear about Earth's reclassification. Some will be curious, others will be hostile, but none will risk direct engagement." "Why not?" Simon asked. "Because you proved what the galaxy has always feared, that voluntary cooperation can coordinate as effectively as imposed control. That caring is strategic. That hope is rational when wielded by those who refuse to surrender it." She looked up at the sky, now clear of grids and spacecraft. "You are marked now, not as primitive, as dangerous, as ungovernable, as a species that will survive because you do not require permission to be extraordinary." Garrett stood beside her looking at the same sky. "Good," he said simply. The days that followed were transformation of a different kind. Governments tried to control the narrative and failed. Too many civilians had seen too much shared, too much coordinated, too much. The old systems of information control simply could not contain the flood of human communication. International coalitions formed organically to study what had happened. Scientists collaborated openly. Military forces coordinated defensive preparations. And ordinary people continued doing what they had always done: living, helping, choosing each other. Lyra spent her days working with Rebecca's newly formed Alien Defense Task Force, teaching them everything she knew about galactic civilizations, threat assessment, diplomatic protocols. She taught them how to read alien technology, how to detect observation attempts, how to understand species psychology. But mostly she learned about human resilience from Rebecca, who had spent decades being dismissed for her beliefs and never stopped believing anyway. She learned about human creativity from Simon, who approached every problem as an opportunity for innovation rather than an obstacle to overcome. She learned about human loyalty from Garrett, who had opened his home to her without hesitation and who stood beside her every day as she navigated her new life on Earth. 6 months after the envoy's departure, Lyra had become Earth's official alien liaison. She briefed world leaders to taught xenopolitics, helped humanity prepare for what was coming. But the real work was living, learning to cook human food badly with Garrett's patient instruction, laughing at Simon's terrible jokes about quantum mechanics, planning defensive strategies with Rebecca that balanced military readiness with diplomatic openness, having family again. One evening, Lyra sat beside Garrett on their rebuilt apartment balcony, watching the city lights replace the stars. The apartment had been repaired, expanded slightly to accommodate 2 residents instead of 1. Photographs of Garrett's late wife still held places of honor, but new images had joined in them. Lyra and Garrett at a UN assembly. The team celebrating Simon's breakthrough in alien signal detection. Rebecca receiving a medal for her decades of service. Moments that mattered. "Do you regret it?" Garrett asked quietly. "Choosing us over your own people." Lyra thought about her former life. The research, the isolation, the pursuit of knowledge without connection. Then she thought about the past 6 months. Learning human customs, sharing meals with friends, working toward a future where Earth and the galaxy might coexist peacefully. Having purpose that came from belonging rather than obligation. "No," she said, "I found my people. They just happened to be human." Garrett nodded, accepting this. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their world continue spinning. Above them, stars glittered in patterns humanity was only beginning to understand. Somewhere in that darkness, the galaxy had taken note. In classified syndicate archives, Earth's file had been updated. Species human. Classification, emergent coordination, civilization. Threat assessment, maximum. Recommendation, non-interference. Observation from distance only. Do not engage directly. Additional notes. Subject species demonstrates unprecedented voluntary cooperation without central control. Prioritizes mutual support over efficiency. Capable of rapid adaptation through collective action. Individual specimens willing to sacrifice for non-kin. Pattern suggests resilience increases under pressure rather than decreases. Conclusion: unpredictable, ungovernable, dangerous to standardized control systems. Approach with extreme caution. And on a rooftop in Houston, Clara Brennan continued asking questions that billions tried to answer. She had become famous for that first video during the Grid event, but she had not stopped filming, had not stopped questioning. Her latest post was simple but powerful. She stood on the same rooftop where she had filmed the Grid dissolving. Behind her, the Houston skyline glowed with normal lights. Normal life. But nothing was truly normal anymore. "They called our unpredictability weakness," Clara said to her camera to her billion followers. "Like being impossible to predict was a flaw." She smiled. "But that means they can't control us, can't defeat us. And if caring about each other makes us dangerous to their perfect empire," she looked directly into the lens, "then let's be dangerous." The video went viral across every platform, translated into hundreds of languages, shared billions of times, not as a call to violence, as a declaration of identity. Humanity had been noticed by the galaxy, and humanity had answered with a simple truth: we are here. We care. We choose each other, and we will survive on our own terms. Lyra watched Clara's video from the balcony garret beside her and felt something she had never experienced in all her years studying civilizations: pride in her chosen family. She understands, Lyra said softly. Garrett smiled. They all do. That's what makes us dangerous. Far above Earth, alien civilizations updated their star charts. Sol system, third planet, status active. Earth was marked now, not as conquered, not as controlled, as free. And in a small apartment in Boston, an alien scientist who had spent years observing humans from a distance finally understood the truth she had always suspected. She did not need to study them anymore. She could simply live among them, be one of them. And that made all the difference. The galaxy would test humanity again. Other species would make contact, some peaceful, some hostile. Challenges would come that Lyra could not predict, but she had learned something from living among humans that no amount of research could have taught her. They did not need to predict every challenge to face it. They only needed to remain who they were, spontaneous in their coordination, generous in their care, stubborn in their hope, human, and that would be enough. Lyra leaned her head on Garrett's shoulder, watching the stars emerge as the city lights dimmed. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For answering when I asked for help, for showing me what it means to belong. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that captured everything that had happened since that midnight when power failed and a desperate alien appeared in his bedroom. You didn't just ask one human for help, he said. You asked all of us. And we answered because that's what we do. We show up for each other. He looked at her, his expression serious but warm. You're not an alien anymore, Lyra. You're family. And family doesn't need permission to care. Lyra felt tears form in her eyes. Her species did not cry, but she had been living among humans long enough that some of their expressions had become hers. Yes, she whispered, family. They sat together as night deepened, two beings from different worlds who had found common ground in the simple act of choosing each other. Above them, the universe continued its ancient patterns, but on Earth, something new had begun. A species that refused to be controlled had proven they could survive contact with the galaxy, not through strength of arms, not through technological superiority, but through the simple, stubborn, beautiful act of caring about each other. And somewhere in the cosmic archives, that truth was being recorded. Humanity, impossible to predict, impossible to control, impossible to defeat, because they had learned something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten, that the most powerful force in the universe is not order. It is choice. The choice to help, the choice to stand, the choice to believe that together anything is possible. One human had heard a desperate plea in the darkness. Please help me, human. And 7 billion had answered, not because they had to, because they chose to. And in that choice, everything changed.